Good afternoon. I'm Adam Lupel, IPI's Vice President, and it really is my pleasure to welcome you all to this Public Policy Forum, National Action Plans for National Challenges, addressing environmental crises through the WPS Agenda. Thank you to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA for partnering with us on this event. IPI has had a long partnership with Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan. I was there a year and a half ago, actually, at their headquarters. But I think this is actually the first time we have partnered directly with SPF USA, if I'm right. So we're really happy about this partnership. Really particularly grateful to have the opportunity to work with you, Shanti, and SPF USA. So really, thank you so much. I think when we think about the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, and of course this week related to Security Council Resolution 1325, celebrating 25 years next year, traditional security concerns generally come to mind: armed conflict, peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace building. However, within our work at IPI, we have long had an interest in understanding how the WPS agenda and the gender lens it provides can provide important lessons and applications to more expanded understandings of peace, gender, and security. And this includes how the WPS agenda can be better linked with environmental and climate concerns, in particular via the fourth pillar of WPS, relief and recovery, which I feel tends to be an area that is given less attention, at least maybe here in New York. While there is research highlighting the positive links between women's rights in a country and its preparedness for climate emergencies, as well as growing recognition that climate emergency preparedness is indeed a gendered process, as everything is, few national action plans on WPS include language around climate considerations. Today's discussion thus aims to shed light on how member states can better reflect the expanded WPS agenda to incorporate issues related to disaster risk reduction and climate change, and add language to that effect to their context-specific, individually tailored national action plans. As you can already see here, we have a great panel to work through all of this, and we will hear from speakers representing a variety of stakeholders, including member states, the UN, and civil society with on-the-ground experience. So please stay tuned. Thank you all again for joining us. But first, before we get to our panel, we have a couple of further opening remarks, and so it is now my pleasure to introduce Shanti Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, who will provide further opening remarks. Shanti, welcome to IPI. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's very nice to now be part of the IPI family as well with our sister organization, Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Tokyo. So again, it's really wonderful to be here on the sidelines of the WPS open debate at the UN. As I often say, as nonprofits, we have the benefit of being able to occupy this unique space that allows us to convene people and conversations that are often siloed from one another. I truly appreciate IPI's partnership so that together we could bring together today's speakers who come from various sectors, working to protect and support us all as we globally grapple with climate change and disasters. Separately, our organizations have been working on these aligned issues. Sasakawa USA on exploring how disaster risk reduction can be strengthened through women, peace, and security, and IPI on the nexus of climate change and women, peace, and security. We hope that through today's discussion, we can explore the work that is being done to more closely link climate change and disaster risk reduction to the tenets of the WPS framework and promote them globally for a more secure and equitable future for all. Before closing my remarks, I wanted to briefly introduce Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, as we're not so well known here in New York City. So we are a nonpartisan organization in Washington, D.C., and we are dedicated to deepening the understanding of and strengthening the relationship between the U.S. and Japan for the benefit of a free and open international community. We have a range of activities, mainly focusing on security and diplomacy, and we do that through exchanges, dialogues, briefings, publications, and such. For the past 2.5 years, under the guidance of our advisor, Ambassador Milan Verveer, who many of you probably know of, I've been working to integrate women, peace, and security into the U.S.-Japan alliance, finding avenues of collaboration for our two countries to work more closely together on. And I'm really thrilled to see the growth that Women, Peace, and Security has seen within the alliance. The two countries are now formally working on it officially together, as well as US, Japan, Philippines. So it's great to see the growth of Women, Peace, and Security being used in that kind of diplomatic sense. And today is another highlight of how beyond the US-Japan alliance, we can work together globally with our partners, multilateral organizations. Those of us in the room are all passionate about women, peace, and security. That's why we're here. I'm speaking to the choir, but we have a lot of work to do to educate and kind of change the mindset of those that we need to come on board with us. So I hope this discussion can further explore these issues and areas, and we can leave maybe having more questions, but more conversations we can continue with. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shanti, and thank you again for your partnership. Welcome to the IPI partner family. My name is Phoebe Donnelly, and I lead the Women, Peace, and Security program here at IPI. I will be moderating today's discussion, but before we have our panel, we'll have some additional opening remarks from Irene Felon, Special Representative for Women, Peace, and Security for NATO. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. I have to say my 20 years around the Women, Peace and Security agenda, I never had the opportunity. I mean, I crossed the path with IPI, so I'm very glad to have this opportunity to be here and to partner with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation US. I was in Japan in May this year as a guest of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and I had the opportunity to discover the commitment and the work to advance the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So it's an enormous pleasure to have the opportunity to work together with a sister organization here in the US, with whom also we have a strong cooperation on advancing the agenda, especially following the summit earlier this year in DC. I think we all share the same commitment in this room, as you said. And in this important week, when we celebrate the anniversary of 1325, I think it's extremely relevant that we found a space for a frank and honest conversation about this topic, also beyond the open debate that is taking place at the Security Council. So I really value this space, and I feel the energy also when we come together and we share this commitment. And it's particularly important, as we were discussing before entering the room with the other speakers, that we look at the connection between women, peace, and security and climate change. And this is something that we are doing at NATO. And this is extremely important that we do in this time when the world is confronted with an unacceptable high number of armed conflict. We heard in these days that more than 170 conflicts have been recorded in 2023. And across the globe, the impacts of increasing air and sea temperature are mostly already observed in more frequent and extreme weather events, from catastrophic floods in the Sahel, Asia, and Europe, and storms such as Hurricane Milton to devastating droughts and wildfires. But conflicts and natural disasters destroy lives, homes, livelihoods, and infrastructure, and force an incredibly high number of people into displacement. Women and girls are profoundly impacted by the compounding effects of climate change, conflict, fragility, and humanitarian crisis, as also acknowledged at last year's United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP28. While the nexus of WPS, climate change and security is increasingly catching the attention of both the WPS and the climate change and security communities, significant gaps remain in terms of awareness, understanding, and effectively addressing these interconnected challenges. The research efforts aim at shedding light on the deep interconnection between gender equality, climate, and security are essential. And I commend them not only because they help us understand the impact on communities, but also in how they shape our ability to prepare and to respond effectively to these evolving challenges. Indeed, data will help us to make better informed decisions and set our priorities right. Some of you here today may be wondering why and how a political military alliance like NATO is looking at WPS and climate change and security. And some of you might also be concerned by the securitization of both WPS and climate change. Let me share with you a few considerations on NATO's role and how we connect these two topics, as our conversation today is focused on national action plans. My first reflection concerns NATO's unique role in advancing and implementing both agendas as part of the broader international community's effort. The Alliance is committed to defending and promoting the principles of individual liberty, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and recognizes gender equality and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda as integral to sustainable peace and as a reflection of our common values and core principles. Advancing WPS is therefore both a strategic and a value-based imperative. At the same time, NATO acknowledges the effect of climate change on security and is willing to lead global efforts in understanding, adapting to, and mitigating these effects. Over the past years, we have moved forward the work on both topics, on WPS and on climate change and security. This leads me to my second reflection. How are we connecting these two topics at NATO? Interestingly, the cross-referencing of the two agendas first started at the action plan level. Both the 2021 Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security and Climate Change and Security make explicit mention of each other, highlighting the growing recognition of their interconnectedness. An important milestone was achieved 1 year later when NATO's 2022 strategic concept lifted both agendas up at strategic level of the alliance, recognizing WPS and human security agendas and climate change as issues of cross-cutting importance to NATO. This means they are to be integrated into all the alliance does. And most recently, another important step in making a stronger connection between the two has happened in the updated NATO policy on women, peace and security, which was endorsed at the NATO summit in Washington in July this year. In the new policy, climate change is identified as a defining challenge of our time. NATO recognizes that gender inequality, conflict, and climate change intersect, particularly affecting women and girls. Women's unique experiences and skills are invaluable in decision-making processes and in developing effective solutions to address the security challenges posed by climate change. Moreover, NATO acknowledges that climate change impacts not only our assets and missions, but also our overall resilience and civil preparedness and our security environment in general. This reality highlights the critical need to integrate gender perspectives into our climate change and security agenda. By prioritizing awareness, adaptation, mitigation, and outreach, we can harness the strengths on women and ensure a comprehensive approach to these urgent challenges. Altogether, important groundwork has been accomplished in establishing linkages between the two agendas at policy level on which we can build as we further advance work on them. The upcoming development of a new action plan for the implementation of the updated WPS policy will provide another opportunity to strengthen these linkages. This ties in with my last reflection, the importance of breaking down the silos between WPS and the other policy areas, including climate change and securities. By integrating WPS priorities, approaches, and tools, such as women participation, gender mainstreaming, and gender analysis, we can unlock new opportunities for synergies. I will just point out a few when it comes to NATO. Both the WPS and the climate change agendas recognize the instrumental role of engaging a broad range of actors. This includes cooperation with partner nations, international and regional organizations, as well as active engagement with civil society and with the private sector. Such collaborative efforts are essential for the successful implementation of our initiatives at NATO. Our WPS agenda provides for the unique mechanism within the organization called Civil Society Advisory Panel, CSAP, composed of WPS experts from civil society, academia, and think tank, offering a platform for engagement and exchange on a range of WPS topics, including climate change. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of Anne Fleur here in the room as part of the expert of our Civil Society Advisory Panel. The need for further research is another opportunity, both for conducting gender-specific research and gender mainstreaming in climate change and security research. NATO has some tools that offer possibilities for making the connection. For example, the Science for Peace and Security program, that it's a program that we have in NATO that brings together allies and partner countries, such as Japan, in developing a joint project. And also the new NATO-accredited Climate Change and Security Center for Excellence based in Montreal. I can continue this list of opportunities by adding, for example, training and education products or risk and impact assessment. But critical to all of them is ensuring gender-responsive leadership and accountability, which is a new strategic objective in our updated WPS policy. Transforming internal organization culture, starting at leadership level, is key to stop working in silos, in particular when it comes to implementing women, peace, and security. Dear all, conflict, disaster, vulnerability, fragility, gender inequality, the ways they are interconnected need to be known and understood by both communities, the WPS and the climate change and security, if we are to make progress on either agendas. As we find ourselves at the eve of its 25th anniversary, we have to acknowledge how the WPS agenda has been expanding and adapting to a diversity of existing and new challenges that know no borders. From emerging disruptive technologies to climate change today and yet unknown challenges of tomorrow. It is important that we keep the agenda's transformative nature of achieving gender equality at heart. It is the added value it will also bring to other agendas and leads towards sustainable or positive peace. For sure, achieving this requires a joint effort from all actors, and NATO is ready to contribute its part. I look forward to hearing and learning from the experienced panelists and participants will share. This is in the spirit of this week, as we are also looking for opportunities to do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Special Representative Phelan. It's really a privilege to have everyone here. We're not only on the margins of the open debate, we're in the actual day, lunch break of the open debate. So thank you for joining us during a really exciting day. And I really appreciate your focus on breaking down silos. I think when we'll hear from our panelists, we'll really see a bunch of different fields, perspectives represented. So I'm excited to get to our panel. A reminder, after our panelists, we'll have an opportunity for question and answer from our online and in-person audience. So feel free to think of your questions now. I'm not going to go into a long introduction for each panelist because you should have their bios, but I'm going to briefly introduce them and pose them an opening question to spark their remarks. So we'll start with Minister Sho Ono. He's the Minister of Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs for the Permanent Mission of Japan to the UN. Minister Ono, Japan's third National Action Plan on WPS includes a strong emphasis on women's participation and the incorporation of a gender perspective into disaster risk reduction, or DRR. disaster response, and climate change. What influenced the decision to include these topics in the National Action Plan, or NAP, as we might throw around acronyms? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your introduction, and good afternoon, distinguished guests. First, I'd like to thank the International Peace Institute and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA for convening this important event and inviting us. And as mentioned, today is the day for the open debate at the Security Council, and I'd like to congratulate on the Swiss presidency on having more than 100 speakers in the open debate. To respond to your question, Japan's latest third National Action Plan consists of 5 pillars, and one of which is disaster prevention, disaster response, and climate change initiatives. Having experienced and overcome a number of large-scale natural disasters, including the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, Japan recognizes the importance of integrating gender perspectives into all phases of disaster prevention, disaster response, reconstruction, and climate change efforts. This recognition is why disaster risk reduction has been a priority since Japan's first National Action Plan. When restructuring the third action plan, Japan elevated DRR to its own independent pillar, reflecting its crucial importance. Also, I'd like to highlight the importance of this agenda in the regional context. The Asia-Pacific region is the most disaster-prone region globally, accounting for 29% of the world natural disasters over the last 30 years, leading up to 2019. During this period, the region was exposed to the largest number of natural disasters with 2,845 events. Globally, through international organizations, JICA, NGOs, and other organizations, Japan provides assistance which incorporates gender perspectives to disaster-affected and disaster-vulnerable countries to support their disaster prevention and climate change efforts. For example, since 2016, through UNITAR, Japan has been supporting a human resource development project on the role and the leadership of women in natural disasters, especially tsunamis, targeting female government officials and other stakeholders in countries that are vulnerable to natural disasters. Domestically, Japan is also actively promoting women's participation in disaster prevention, mitigation, and recovery efforts and decision-making bodies. For example, the Japanese government has set the target of 30% female representation in disaster management councils at the prefectural and local municipal levels and requires municipalities to report their progress periodically. The data is made available to the public on a regular basis, ensuring transparency and accountability. Moreover, Japan incorporates gender perspectives into disaster management policies, many of which have been born out of the disaster experiences of women. When it comes to the implementation of the WPS agenda at the national level, since its first National Action Plan, we have implementation plans specifying targets and responsible government ministries and agencies, together with a mechanism to report annual progress assessed by specialists and CSOs. Therefore, for example, in our third action plan, goals such as sharing good practices of disaster risk reduction, projects that promote women's participation and take into account gender perspectives, and responsible ministries such as the Fire and Disaster Management Agency are listed. Moreover, to facilitate more smooth and transparent coordination, in January this year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs established a cross-organizational WPS task force within the ministry and strengthened its cooperation with related ministries and agencies, such as the Ministry of Defense And I will stop here, and I welcome your question more on a more specific topic or on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Ono. Thank you so much for those really concrete targets. I saw the target of 30% in disaster management councils, the way Japan is planning the implementation and the reporting on progress. It's really useful to have those ideas and metrics. It is now my pleasure to turn to Katrina Fodavat, who is the Principal Deputy Director at the Office of Global Women's Issues for the U.S. Department of State. CAT. The U.S. NAP explicitly mentions the need to, and we quote, jointly address climate security and WPS, acknowledging the gendered dimensions of the climate crisis and the critical role of women as leaders in climate risk mitigation, adaptation, and response. Why did the U.S. include climate-related issues in its NAP on WPS, and what do you foresee will be its impact? Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Phoebe. And I have to thank IPI and Sasakawa for having this important discussion today. And of course, it's always an honor to be with Special Rep Felon, as well as our UN colleagues, and of course, our Japanese colleagues as well. I have to say, every time I come to IPI, President Zaid makes me feel like I can say anything and we can have very frank discussions. So be prepared for that, and I'm happy to answer anything. You know, this has really been an opportunity, and we have heard a lot about, I have to say, one of the framings that has come up in this last week, and you know, Harriet has heard it said multiple times, that the world is on fire. And I think having this discussion on climate right now really feels like the world is on fire. There are so many climate crises, as well as just conflict crises around the world. And one of the things we kept talking about was, then let us all be the firefighters. So I also want to thank all of the civil society organizations, the activists, all of you that continue to fight this fight every day to make sure that we are addressing these issues, that we are empowering the voices of those being the most affected, that we are empowering the voices of women to make sure that their leadership and their sacrifices and their courage is something that we are advocating for every single day. So one of the reasons and goals of our 2023 U.S. Strategy and National Action Plan was really we did some soul searching of ourselves. We always do a report about what we have done. According to our Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017, we have to do an annual report. And so when we were doing our new strategy, we were really looking to address challenges and lessons learned from previous years. And certainly climate was front and center. We wanted to make sure, you know, we see all the time that women are the first responders in any climate disaster. They are the first responders, are the ones clothing, feeding, making sure that you know, people are being taken care of, and they're often the last people to be included in any leadership or any resourcing decisions that happen. So we wanted to make sure to address the highlight and the intersections of multiple issue areas that included climate. This ensures that the work we do on WPS is both backed up and supported through our policy and is expanded through all our security issues to avoid siloing, duplication, and again, advocate for women's leadership and meaningful participation. In addition, our level of effort number 3, which we call it Relief, Response, and Recovery, aims to prioritize the integration of gender-responsive policies and programs to support the safety, participation, and leadership of women and girls in the U.S. government responses on conflict, crises, and disasters, and to reinforce women's agency and decision-making at every level of response and recovery efforts, and to provide safe and equitable access to humanitarian assistance. This line of effort was also added to bring the U.S. further into alignment with the global WPS agenda, and was also an effort to capture and make sure that we are ensuring WPS inclusion in the immense amount of work being done in risk management, disaster relief and recovery, and the diverse issues such as climate, and bring WPS into these areas. I have to note, I am actually a Floridian. I was brought up in Florida. I'm an Iranian American that was brought up in Florida. But, you know, as someone who has grown up with disasters that have happened, I will note that one of the lessons learned from Florida is all of the communities that actually had a more inclusive approach were the ones that were more resilient, they were more economically sustainable, and they recovered much faster. So from my personal experience, I can tell you this is not only something that we should do, this is something that really is effective and essential. Additionally, ensuring this line of effort in the U.S. National Action Plan has really opened up so many doors to new possibilities for partnerships, projects, and programs, and engagement with civil society and non-governmental leaders. Again, we have also worked with our Japanese colleagues and others, and certainly with our NATO colleagues, to make sure that we are incorporating DRR and climate issues into the G7, G20, and other multilateral initiatives. One of those partnerships have, of course, been with our colleagues in Japan and with organizations such as Sasakawa USA. Seeking the work and the leadership has emerged from incorporating responsive policy action plans into our national action plan, which has led to exponential efforts and something we want to continue pushing forward to empower women's leadership to be able to address the most local needs for communities and women's families. And with other intersecting issues such as cyber technology, economic security, race, disability, and the rights of LGBTQI+ and others mentioned in the National Action Plan. We want to make sure this is intersectional. The goal is to ensure that the work we do leads to stronger and more sustainable societies for all. This includes addressing the existing and pervasive drivers of insecurity, while also examining the gender dimension of emerging security issues. Climate is both an existing issue as well as one we should be viewed in the context of an emerging issue, as the impacts of climate are ever evolving and changing, and often lead to the drivers of conflict. However, one thing remains constant. Women experience climate disproportionately. And yet women, particularly women civil society leaders, are some of the most active leaders in identifying avenues to address climate-related issues in unique ways. I will also say that this is also something that has brought up the disinformation issues. Women leaders in the environmental space are often the most attacked and some of the most endangered individuals as well. So that also needs to be taken into consideration in our WPS agenda. Women, girls, gender diverse persons, and members of other marginalized communities play a critical role in addressing the climate crisis as we seek to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius and reach net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050. The climate crisis and gender equality, which are inextricably linked, evidence increasingly demonstrates that empowering women politically, economically, and socially, and meaningfully, including their needs and perspectives in decision-making, leads to more equitable and sustainable policies, including those to combat the climate crisis. Climate adaptation is needed to significantly reduce impacts of climate change on our communities, our ecosystems, and our economies. Women can act as agents of change at different levels of the adaptation process, including in agriculture, natural resource management, and the development of early warning systems to ensure that adaptation efforts are effective and implemented around the world. It is also important to remember that while we strive to incorporate WPS into areas such as climate risk mitigation and other areas, that those working in this arena will also strive to incorporate aspects of their work into WPS. Only by working with those across multiple areas and identify and incorporate these efforts will we be able to see any impactful change. So I often feel like in weeks like this, we are often preaching to the choir, we're talking to each other, but we really need to make sure to get to the other sectors, including the private sector. Next week, I will be in the Philippines at the WPS conference, which I also understand Japan has a strong hand in supporting. While there, I will sign an MOU between the governments of the Philippines and the United States to work together on the Philippines WPS Center of Excellence. One of the goals of this center is to focus on regional issues through a WPS lens, and of course, the impact of climate. While the Philippines will be driving their WPS Center activities, the U.S. will proudly support through technical workshops on issues such as National Action Plan development, implementation, including climate and disaster relief and recovery. This is an example of WPS policy priority initiatives which can facilitate strong and impactful work. We would welcome the Japanese partnership on this initiative as well, as Japan has led quite a bit of WPS effort in the region. And we want to make sure to incorporate that WPS and disaster relief and recovery prioritization as well. The Philippines Center is still finalizing their work plan currently, but we do know that one of the main issues they're focusing on is disaster relief and recovery. I'm looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists on more details of their WPS and climate nexus. And on my final note, the U.S. Department of State recognizes this as an opportunity to promote climate action and solutions by harnessing the potential of women and making sure that women, girls, gender diverse persons through policy, programming, and public outreach are included in all of our efforts around WPS. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you for sharing about your own on-the-ground experience as a Floridian. I think those examples that we all experience are really useful to hear about, as well as the work the U.S. government is doing. And I really liked your quote on the first to be affected and the last to be included. I think that double-sided position is really important to think about. I'm going to now turn for a UN perspective on some of these topics we've been discussing. I'm going to turn to Jafet Eichel, Associate Expert at Climate, Peace and Security in the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Jafet, UNDPPA, released the report Weathering Two Storms, Gender and Climate and Peace and Security in 2022, which focuses on the compounding effects of gender, climate, and security risks. Based on the report, in what ways could the goals of the WPS agenda and the climate agenda be better linked?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today. And also thank you to IPI and Sasakawa for elevating this very crucial topic, but also showing the synergies between these two agendas. My name is Jafet, but I also want to introduce my colleague Sarah from the Gender, Peace and Security Unit, and that just goes to show that we are actually breaking silos in DPPA by collaborating on issues such as this, not only from the Climate, Peace, Security Unit, which I'm a part of, but also the Gender, Peace and Security Unit. So that's an example of how we continue to work forward. First and foremost, I would like to say that it's no coincidence that many of the countries most susceptible to climate risks also host a UN peacekeeping or special operations, special political mission. At DPPA, therefore, climate change matters for our work. And we continue to learn more through engagement such as the ones today. And I'm very happy to be here and also learning from all colleagues on the panel and from the interventions from the floor. And one of our core tasks in DPPA is to monitor and assess global political developments, but also to detect potential crises before they erupt, devise effective responses, and also support UN colleagues on the ground. And fairly quickly, we realized that not including both gender perspectives, but also climate perspectives, we're not able to do any of these tasks that we set out to do. Addressing gender differentiated risks, but also the agency in climate vulnerable and conflict affected states is critical for DPPA's efficiency, sustainability, and also our success. Our 2022 report, Weathering Two Storms, which I did not bring a copy of, but I know Phoebe read it, highlights a convergence between gender, peace and security, but also climate risks. And it sets the very humble stage for raising awareness on how both men and women are impacted differently, but also how they offer different solutions and different agencies. Of the 10 most climate vulnerable countries in the world, 8 are also considered fragile by the World Bank, and also ranked in the bottom 20% of global indexes on women's inclusion, injustice, and security. So that's why our report is actually named Weathering Two Storms. On one side is the storm of climate change, but also the storm of gender inequality. What we've seen from our colleagues in the field, limited access to natural resources, control of economic assets, and decision-making power can all reduce women's adaptive capacity in times of climate upheaval. And also from our colleagues, we've seen that changes in the availability of firewood and water, for example, can increase the risk of gender-based violence and raise barriers to girls' education. We've even seen reports from Afghanistan at the moment that climate change may even increase the number of child marriages, especially impacting young girls. Meanwhile, in other contexts, we also see that gendered roles put upon men also impact them negatively. It pushes them to both migrate, but also pushes them to potentially join armed groups because the disruptions to natural resource-based livelihoods exacerbates existing gendered aspects of societies. On the other hand, women's social roles as providers of food, water, and energy, as my fellow panelist has said, holds great potential because women are actually champions of natural resource management, both because they're better placed to anticipate and manage climate-related risks, but also resolve conflicts and natural resources and manage natural resources. The Secretary General's new agenda for peace has recommended that we make climate, peace, security a political priority, and also it recognizes the important role for women in addressing the climate security nexus. It also calls for a shift in the prevention and sustaining peace paradigm and for action to transform gendered power dynamics in peace. We actually called it breaking the patriarchy first, but it did not go through the Pact of the Future. So now we call it transform gendered power dynamics, and also address the interlinkages between climate, peace, and security. At the PPA, we are making efforts to address multidimensional climate crisis in a more integrated way, not only by both Sarah and I being here today, but also through our special political missions throughout the world who conduct climate peace security assessments, which really sharpens the understanding of the climate risks faced by women and girls, but also the opportunities that they bring to the table. Secondly, the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund really supports key projects on the ground, and they've invested almost $170 million since 2016. And many of these projects already highlight the co-benefits of peace, women's participation, and climate solutions. In terms of the deployment of our climate peace security advisors, they work side by side with their gender advisors, also in special political missions. And in that vein, I would like to raise 3 ways in which we can continue to build synergies between climate peace security and women peace security. So that was a long way to just come to my, my 3 points that I wanted to raise. So firstly, as I said, we have 7 climate peace security advisors throughout the world. Our newest addition is in Afghanistan, where I think all of us can agree that both climate change and women's non-participation and gender equality are both huge tasks at hand. But these advisors really permits us to bring increased attention to women's inclusion, both because they're increasingly asked by their government counterparts to provide advice on national plans, strategies such as national adaptation plans, so the other NAP, and national disasters for disaster management. They also ask to do capacity building exercises, and therefore by elevating this, we can bring in women to the conversation and also do capacity building for women in such contexts. The advisor's terms of reference, for example, explicitly says that they need to work with the gender advisor colleagues, and therefore, again, working in tandem, this partnership could more deliberately aim to lower barriers for women's leadership in natural resource management, but also advocate for women's participation in disaster management. Secondly, we can also seek ways to bring attention to the fact that women are not only victims of natural disasters, but also architects of resilience and weavers of social cohesion. They're a resource and an asset in disaster management processes and sustainability. And I think by really elevating very, very concrete data that including women leads to optimum utilization of resources. It also reduced dependencies of outsourced resources and increased community resilience faster. One example I'd like to bring forward is from East Africa, where there was a study done where they were asked how climate change impacts the community. And they first asked the men, of course, and they said, look, from our community and 15 kilometers to the market, this is how climate change really interacts. They then asked the women to do the same, and the women could provide a very detailed map from the community and 5 kilometers out. So by including both aspects, they were actually able to look at the entire climate change and its impacts on the community. So that's an example I increasingly use when we talk to partners. We can do so both in policy forums, donor engagement, and insisting on more research to strengthen this argument that women are also agencies of change. Because then we can change the inclusion argument of not only being a normative right thing to do, but actually the smart thing to do. And thirdly, any efforts should pay attention to local context and local ownership. The 2022 PBF thematic review, which I invite you all to read, is actually really good on climate security projects, highlighted an interesting project from Yemen, for example, where women were successfully included in natural resource management, disaster management, and conflict resolution. The project, which supported women in the governance of Sana'a and Laj to mitigate water-based disputes, also really formed and supported women water user groups. And it also created conflict resolution committees where women were part of these committees. As part of this, the project, women's involvement was required as a condition of assistance and donor funding throughout the project, and it was mandatory for women to participate. As a result, these water associations resolved 15 water-related conflicts and also gave increased access to 27,000 farmers in the Yemen areas. So just to say that allowing women themselves to articulate the roles they would like to play rather than imposing external frameworks really has proven as a successful intervention. I would like to conclude just to say that we in DPPA stand ready to support in any way, and that the climate, peace, security, and women, peace, security agendas can and must reinforce each other.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And the report really is wonderful. I would encourage everyone to read it. And it's great to hear about the partnership that you're doing internally within the UN, within DPPA. I'm now excited to turn to Mary Ruth Belsi-Prieb, who is the co-founder of Accelerate, Director for Women, Peace, and Security Programs, and a Senior Fellow at the Pacific Forum International. Mary Ruth, how can member states effectively tap in and connect with the expertise of grassroots women's civil society regarding issues related to climate, DRR, and WPS, and then apply gender-responsive approaches to disaster response? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Can you hear me okay? That's good. Okay. I want to speak today a little bit about, from my experience working with U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is, for those of you not familiar with military in the U.S., it's the combatant command for the Asia-Pacific region. And over the last several years, my colleagues and I have been implementing women, peace, and security programs within Asia-Pacific that center on the collaboration between women's civil society organizations and the militaries within their own countries. And so our role has been to bring these two groups together on a variety of different topics, such as cybersecurity, violent extremism, maritime security, et cetera. But my particular area of interest is in climate security. And so one of our biggest programs was to bring 7 different countries together to talk about how to make more practical strides in applying a gender lens to disaster risk reduction and in military parlance, the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or HADR. And so today, what I'm coming to you with is 2 recommendations for increasing CivMil, or civilian military engagement and partnership, in order to achieve the goals of WPS and the disaster risk reduction efforts. Does it need to be closer? Let's get it closer. Okay, there we go. So I have 2 general suggestions that I'm going to make, and this is something that we are working on actively. It's a work in progress, but these are have come out of this work that we've been doing. So the 2 are that I think civil society, when brought together with the militaries, can make a really good case for why human security is connected to national security. And by making that case, it becomes a lot clearer for people within the defense and security sector why including a gender perspective is important. And so what we talk about in these sessions are things like, in a disaster situation, how a disaster can make individual humans feel more fragile or unstable. Because of social and economic instabilities, there can be increased insecurities in those areas of their lives. And if those things become severe enough, social unrest, tensions between groups, and potential conflict can break out. And that can also lead to things like state legitimacy issues and weakening of national security. So the women's groups within their communities can talk specifically about how these things actually happen, the sort of chain of events that can lead to these things within their own communities, so they can contextualize the women, peace, and security agenda within a disaster specific scenario for their own countries. And so I think their women's groups are one of the best to be able to make this case, and that it's an important case in order for defense and security officials and branches to be able to implement the WPS agenda within their own contexts. In particular, I think women's groups can help to elucidate the needs that women and girls have during disasters, which is many of my colleagues have already talked about, but then also to make the connection to national security, and that those countries that have less security and safety for women at an individual level are also less likely to be peaceful and prosperous. So the second thing that I would suggest is that women's CSOs, when they work together with the defense and security sectors in their own countries, can do a lot to help concretize WPS in the DRR context, or make very practical how do we implement WPS perspectives within a disaster situation. And here I look to Japan as being actually a really good example for how to start to do this. They've developed this very interesting shelter management checklist, which has a whole bunch of different gendered needs that need to be addressed within a shelter following a disaster, including, I might add, addressing unpaid care work and making sure that within disaster shelter situation that those responsibilities are equally assigned to both women and men. And I think this is a really interesting way. They've developed it in consultation with women's civil society in Japan. And it has become a tool that is really useful for them, that's very practical, and it gives defense and security sector individuals something really pragmatic that they can apply within the situation. What I would love to see is a shelter checklist like this expanded to include not just shelter, but also things like search and rescue, medical support, relief and recovery, and a whole bunch of other areas, because there really are different types of responses that the defense and security individuals are responsible for in a disaster, but then they also change over the course of a disaster, from pre-disaster, which it can include things like early warning and financial preparation and capacity building, to the actual disaster itself and the types of activities that are going on there, and then finally to the relief and recovery in the long-term recovery from those disasters. So we as a group within our gender and health and climate security engagement with 7 countries in the Asia Pacific have developed a gendered response that's an action planning tool that takes you through 11 different factors that allows you to sort of ask questions in a disaster scenario to find out where there might be vulnerabilities that are gendered. It's too long, so we need to be working on it and finding better ways to narrow it down into more simple checklists. But it's a start, and that's something that has come out of the CivMil discussions that we've been having. I want to just end with how exactly does the defense and security sector engage with civil society, with just a few thoughts. It can be, first of all, difficult to identify the best civil society organizations within a country that are working on things like climate security that would work well within defense and security. And so that does take time and effort, and having interviews and with these organizations to see whether they're a good fit. And there's also often a lack of trust. And so there needs to be trust building, often at the front end, in order to get them to come alongside and to be involved in these types of engagements. There might need to be some capacity building for these organizations, as they might be unfamiliar talking to the defense and security sector or speaking the language of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. They might be doing Women, Peace and Security and not really know it because they're using a different language set. There might need to be some incentivization, such as funding, visibility, and influence that would come along with being involved in CivMil engagements. And then you need to apply various feminist principles, such as co-creation and intersectionality, in order to make these engagements really effective and impactful in terms of what civil society needs, and to highlight their expertise. So I will leave you with that. I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing the toolkit when it's shortened, and we'll get some bite-sized pieces maybe from you. Finally, I want to turn to Harriet Williams-Bright, who is the WPS Humanitarian Action Compact Lead for UN Women. Harriet, based on your work leading the WPS Humanitarian Action Compact, how does the Compact's monitoring framework encourage member states to link humanitarian action, climate disaster response, and the WPS agenda? What is the importance of considering a holistic approach to WPS implementation at the national level?
Thank you so very much Phoebe, and good afternoon to everyone and those listening online. As I was sitting here, I thought back to the last time I was on a panel here, and it was quite some time ago, I think around 2013, and it was a panel with Margaret Vogt, who passed, but was such an advocate for this agenda. And as we all are looking towards the 25th anniversary, it just struck me how the agenda is evolving, and those who contributed so much to it are no longer with us, and how new generations are coming forward to take this mantle forward. So I had that flashback as I was listening to the different panelists. And thank you so very much to IPI and Sasakawa Peace Foundation for convening this discussion. And I think it's so important, but also quite relevant, because earlier this week, and a lot of you were part of that discussion, we had the WPS Focal Points Network meeting. And one of the discussions that we had was around this idea of emerging security challenges. And how do we take it forward in the context of developing and implementing national action plans? And we spent a lot of time in the breakout sessions trying to unpack it. How do we become more effective in integrating these issues for impact? And before I go into some of the things that we discussed, I wanted to note that by UN Women's analysis, as of 2022, we had 40% of national action plans that reflected references to climate change. And it was 46% for regional action plans. And I think we need to also talk about some of the reflections that came out of the meeting, but I think in general for the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which is how do we do this without losing sight of the core principles of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and also the thematic areas and the issues that we have long focused on, particularly on participation in peace processes, accountability for conflict-related sexual violence. And I think there's a little bit of tension there on how do we integrate, for example, climate security, technology-facilitated gender violence, and other aspects that we are faced with, and still keep the core of the agenda. So how do we not lose the WPS principles as we bring in all of these different conversations? And I think that's something hearing from the different panelists, the examples from Japan, from the US, and hearing about how they have used this in their national action plans is a good way to take it forward. And also from NATO and how you have integrated these principles in different plans. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is that the national action plans themselves, the Women, Peace and Security National Action Plans themselves, are not necessarily doing as great as we want them to do. So we need to also do a lot of fixing of the plans while we're still expanding them to integrate a lot of different things into them, because of course we want to be comprehensive. We want to ensure that we have a very strong global outlook, when we're looking at these global security challenges. But again, our key challenge is how do we ensure that the national action plans are not on the periphery of global security and peace decisions and decision-making. I usually say the national action plans are not a project, for example. So how do we ensure that they are part of the DNA and part of the way we work in carrying out these different processes? So I think my key message for here today is that as we are integrating these, different and also very, very important and critical challenges around climate and disaster risk response in national action plans, can we also look very strongly at the national adaptation plans and strategies and policy frameworks like the gender gap? Can we spend a lot of time as well doing that advocacy to ensure that this is a two-way street, that those plans and strategies also integrate the core principles of the WPS agenda and also some of the things that are very much the bulwark of the WPS work that we do. So that's also in line with this whole of government, whole of society approach that we want to do when we cite good practices around moving forward on this work. I was also asked to speak around the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. And to share, it is a multi-stakeholder platform which brings together government, civil society, regional organizations, academia, and the private sector, and allows for cross-regional and cross-thematic collaboration to advance this work. And within the context of the Compact, we have really taken sight that we need to broaden the way we look at security issues. And so the pillars are aligned with the WPS pillars, but are not only on participation and protection, for example, and leadership, but also around economic security and the cross-cutting emerging challenges around climate security, as well as DRR and other humanitarian crises. So we're really trying to ensure that the Nexus approach is integrated in how we take on this work and move it forward. And then one of the things I wanted to share, and I think this has also been reflected in the discussions from the panelists as well, like what principles are we talking about here? How are we doing this work? What are the key ways that we approach this work for impact? And so we are trying, in the context of the Compact, that it's not just about ticking the box and saying we have these actions and we have these plans, but do we have some strong principles that can guide the actions of signatories working on all of these different areas? And of course, one is around the humanitarian development peace nexus. The other is on localization and the importance of that. And I think a lot of panelists have talked about the importance of engaging civil society, ensuring that our work is grounded in the realities of local action. Another one is on intergenerational action. I just mentioned we're looking at generations to come. I'm sure I look young, but yes, I'm a bit older. And of course, we have sustained financing and looking at intersectionality as well as inclusivity. And so the signatories of the Compact, and I'm very happy to say that IPI, the US, Japan, and DPPA are all signatories of the Compact. So please join and be a part of this drive to talk about women, peace and security and humanitarian action, but also to approach it in a very comprehensive, integrated manner. My final thought around this is that there is a lot more that we can do on partnerships building on this work, particularly on the civil society networks that drive both of these agendas from the climate security side, but also from women, peace and security. And it often feels to me like a lost opportunity because the WPS movement is so strong and so active, and so is the climate movement, so strong, so active. And when I think about the pushback on gender equality, when I think about the pushback on this work and ensuring that we have gender considerations very much integrated into the way we address peace and security, this is like, it's just waiting to happen. Imagine just really bringing these movements together more strongly, harnessing that power and ensuring that we have a stronger movement pushing this work forward. So one of the things that we did in the context of generation equality, so you have the Compact, and you also have the Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. And during the discussions around the Summit of the Future, we tried to do just that. And we brought together the constituents of that action coalition, as well as signatories to the compact. And we had this great conversation because we're already doing the work, hearing from panelists from Brazil to Cameroon to Colombia to Myanmar. All of this is happening already organically, but it was almost as if we were hearing the examples for the first time, like, oh, we do localization, oh, we do it too. Okay, how can we do more? Let's connect. We are already working on climate security issues because our country is also in conflict, and it's exacerbated by our environmental factors. So how can we connect formally with the WPS agenda that is pushing participation in peace processes, for example, and women to participate in there? How can we ensure that that leadership and participation is across the board? So again, these are all ways that we could harness that opportunity. So I guess I'm here with a little bit of hope around this issue, and looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Phoebe.
Thank you so much, Harriet. I think we all need a little hope. And I mean, to your point on localization, partnership, grounding realities in local action, we wanted to make sure we were hearing from the voices of women on the ground doing some of this work. So we're going to have two short interventions. It's my pleasure to introduce Miwako Kitamura, who is a researcher from the International Research Institute of Disaster Science at Tohoku University.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I am very honored to be here, and thank you very much to be and IPI and Sasakawa USA and join this meeting gathering. And I'm grateful for the chance to share insight of the crucial instrument of gender, disaster, resilience, and community empowerment. I have and around the world, we already discussed that we experience frequent disaster, conflict, and impact of the climate change. And it is important to recognize that not all the disaster, the equality, the damage. And today, I would like to share the story of the remarkable woman from Noto, and in Japan, and whose resilience and quiet strength in body and the spirit of so many women affected by the earthquake in the Noto, and struck the January 1st of the January. And she has also suffered from the recent flood in the impact on the region. This is a story not just about loss, but about dignity, pride, and the enduring spirit of the communities. Recently, I spent time with an elderly woman, nearly 90 years old, who has lived her entire life in a small village in Noto. From the outside, her house may appear intact, but inside it is a different story. Disrupted the earthquake, and after the New Year's earthquake, she initially made a difficult decision to have her home demolished. However, the process has been agonizingly slow, and the emotional toll intense. Her home, where she raised her family, is now too large, too costly for her to repair or maintain on her own. Her story reflects the lives of the many women in the rural area in Japan. When she first married, life was hard, leaving little time for herself. The only solace that she found was tending her small farm, and the place she cultivated with her own hand. For years, the small part of the land was a source of comfort and strength. The women do not own their homes, and ownership is typically in their husband's name. When their husband passes away, they may inherit his house, but it is often still registered in the elderly son. In her case, over the time, with the passing of her husband, she eventually inherits his house, her pride, her achievement, and the symbol of all her hard work. And but the earthquake shattered the sense of accomplishment. The government assessed her home is only having minor damage. So the financial support she received was minimal. She wanted to ask government officials to examine the damage at her house. If she succeeds, she will receive more funds to repair her house. The inspection process is hectic, and so the many people confused the result. She often say if she were a man and had more power, she could discuss the inspection process more effectively. But as a woman, she feels powerless and no one takes her voice seriously. But her story is not one of hopelessness. It is one of endurance. She continued to fight, not just for herself, but for the dignity of her life and her memories. She reminds us that when recover from the disaster is not just about physical rebuilding. It is about emotional healing and preserving in the connection to our past. This is a story of one woman, but it resonated across the region. Echoed by many women who have quality that shouldered the burden is rebuilding their lives after the North earthquake. In Japan, where the population is aging, the issue is elderly women. It's becoming isolated during disaster, growing concern. For example, the data from the Noto Town Hall shows us is a Noto region where 50% of the population is over 65 years old. 17% of evacuees recent to disaster were women. Although women in Japan tend to live longer than men, this factor should be considered in the disaster risk reduction management globally. The surprising figures highlighted urgent need to targeted support and solutions. Women who have sacrificed and have worked tirelessly now face to the challenges of the rebuilding not just the house, but lives. I am committed to supporting her, so many other women in the Noto. Listening to this story, because usually they are very shy, they don't want to share the story for the outside people. It's the trust building, the fundamentally important. I am committed to supporting so many women, helping them find the support they need, understand by them as they navigate the long road to recovery. They had resilience, they respect our attention and our action. Of course, men also face their own unique difficulties, such as often expectation placed on them to the breadwinner of the families. The most important, the great goal is create a society where can live safety and security, both of the time disaster and in the normal time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kitamura. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm now going to turn to virtual participant Dalal Al-Tahir, who is a board member at the Syria Civil Defense, the White Helmets, to speak about responding to the earthquake and women's roles in response on the disaster.
مرحبا، أنا دلال. بشكر المنظمين لهذا الاجتماع المهم ولجميع الزملاء يلي دخلوا قبلي. حقيقة الكوارث اللي عم بشهدها العالم عم تترك آثار كتير كبيرة على حياة البشرية بالنسبة إلنا في شمال غرب سوريا، وخاصة مثل ما بتعرفوا كارثة زلزال اللي كانت 6 شباط عام 2023. طبعا كانت كارثة كتير كبيرة غيرت ملامح الحياة في سوريا بشكل مأساوي. في البداية لازم نأكد على أهمية دور المرأة في الاستجابة الإنسانية وخاصة أثناء الكوارث، حيث يوجد علاقة متينة بين دورها كمستجيبة في الخطوط الأولى وانعكاس هذا الشيء على التخفيف في حالة التمييز الجنساني.
So now I'm going to consecutively interpret what Dalal has said. Can you please confirm they can hear me properly?
We can hear you great. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So very briefly, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this event and for giving me the opportunity to participate in it. First, I would like to say that we must emphasize the importance of women's role in the humanitarian response, particularly during disasters. And of course, I should also emphasize that there is a strong relationship between the role that women play at the front line as frontline responders and the impact that this has on reducing gender discrimination.
الحقيقة هناك ترابط جدا قوي وفي علاقة وثيقة بين المرأة والسلام والتنوع الجندري في سياق العمل الإنساني وخاصة من خلال الاستجابة للكوارث. بالتجربة السورية لعمل المرأة شفنا كتير من النساء في الخطوط الأمامية عند وقوع الكوارث، ولاحظنا كيف أدوا دورهم ولعبوا دور كتير كبير بتحديد احتياجات المجتمعات المتضررة، وخططوا للحد من آثار الكوارث على حياة المجتمعات وصنعوا السلام.
I would like also to say that there is a strong connection and close relationship between women, peace, and gender diversity in the context of humanitarian work, especially through disaster response. In the Syrian experience, for example, and like noticing women's work, we saw how many women were on the front lines and were the first to respond to such disasters when they occurred. And we noticed how they played a very important and major role in identifying the needs of the affected communities and also in planning to reduce the effects of disasters on the lives of those communities and in making peace.
طبعا بالنسبة لتجربة عملنا كمتطوعات في الدفاع المدني السوري، بشوف إنه كان دورنا كتير مهم ومن أهم الأدوار الحيوية. أثبتنا من خلاله أهمية عمل المرأة في الاستجابة الإنسانية، كعملنا في الاستجابة للقصف اللي كان ولا زال بينهك حياتنا وبيدمرها، ومشاركتنا لزملائنا الرجال في عمليات البحث والإنقاذ في الوقت اللي بيكون فيه هذا المكان معرض لتجدد الغارات والقصف، وكمان نحن عم نبحث فيه عن الناجين المصابين وننتشل القتلى من تحت الأنقاض.
And as for our work as women volunteers in the Syrian civil defense, or as part of the Syrian civil defense, I would like to say that our role is just quite as important and as vital as men's roles, because we have proven through the role that we have played how important it is for women to be engaged and to work in the humanitarian response, such as our work in responding to the bombings and in saving people and rescuing and rescuing people from under the rubble, because these disasters have affected our environment and have affected us very considerably, destroyed our lives, and our participation with our male colleagues hand in hand in search and rescue operations at a time when this place is exposed to renewed raids and bombing, while a technique that the regime used to do where an area would be bombed and when rescuers come to save the people, the same spot would be bombed again so that more casualties fall and more people can die. So we have proved through our work that we have worked together with men to save these people, as many people as possible, from under the rubble.
كذلك استجابتنا للكارثة الطبيعية اللي غيرت ملامح الحياة في سوريا، وخاصة مثل ما ذكرنا هي زلزال 6 شباط، حيث كنا نقوم بنفس العمل اللي كان عم بيقوموا فيه الرجال، فقمنا بإخراج الناس من تحت الأنقاض، قدمنا الإسعافات الميدانية والرعاية الصحية الأولية لإنعاش المصابين، مساعدتهم للإبقاء على قيد الحياة حتى يتم نقلهم للمستشفيات. كمان كان بالتزامن مع عمليات تأمين المأوى اللي تعاوننا من خلالها مع زميلات متطوعات وفرق إنسانية أخرى غير الدفاع المدني السوري. بهاي اللحظات شفنا لوحة متكاملة من الإنسانية صار في عنا من خلالها قدرنا نتكاتف مع بعضنا البعض لنأدي دورنا بشكل الأمثل، بيسهم في تعزيز الأمل لدى أهلنا حتى لا يشعروا باليأس نتيجة ما عاشوا من ألم خلال هذه السنوات كلها، الحرب وكارثة الزلزال.
An important example is our response to the natural disaster that changed the features of life in Syria and changed everything and turned everything in Syria upside down, which is the earthquake of February in 2023. We were working together with our male counterparts hand in hand in supporting all kinds of, in providing all kinds of support to the people that needed it. We rescued people, we took people out from under the rubble and provided field aid and first aid and primary health care to revive the injured people and to help them and to help those who were still alive and breathing until they have been transferred to the hospitals. All of this, of course, we did in conjunction with providing shelter to those people who had no shelter, no place to go, and in cooperation with colleagues and women volunteers from other humanitarian teams and other CSOs. Currently, I I see that this has been a picture of humanity woven together through our ability to unite and work hand in hand with our male counterparts and play an important role that is just as vital in helping these people and contributing and to strengthening hope among our people so that they do not feel any kind of despair as a result of the pain that they have experienced as a result of this earthquake.
طبعا متطوعاتنا عملت كثيرا في إطار الاستجابة لحالات القصف كما ذكرت سابقا، لكن استجابتنا لكارثة الزلزال سلطت الضوء بشكل أكبر على مشاركة النساء في عملية الإنقاذ والبحث تحت الأنقاض، وكيف كانت النساء تقوم بتوزيع المهام وتشارك في وضع الخطط الاستجابة وتقسيم قطاعات العمل. هذا كله انعكس على المنظور الشعبي لعمل النساء ورسخ وعزز دورهم في العمل في كل ميادين بيستطيعوا إنه يتواجدوا فيه. لقد ساهمت النساء في إنقاذ الأرواح وبناء المجتمعات، هذا كله فخر كبير إننا لنكون على قدر المسؤولية. كمان إنه هذا بيعزز من شعور النساء بوجود محفزات تجعلهم قادرات على كسر الصورة النمطية من عمل المرأة، وما تكون المرأة فقط بالخطوط الخلفية، لا بل تبرز دورها القيادة.
Well, the last thing she said was our volunteers, our women volunteers, so to be more accurate, had already worked a lot in the framework of responding to bombing cases and responding to the bombardment. As I have already mentioned. However, the response to the earthquake disaster shed more light on the importance of women's participation in rescue operations and in searching under the rubble for the people and rescuing them. And this, of course, was quite important. And she kind of stopped there, more or less.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dalal. It's really important to have your voice with us here today. So we are going to do a rapid fire. I know I promised time for Q&A. I am so sorry. I just think our panelists were so engrossing that I lost track of time. I couldn't interrupt, but I think we can continue this conversation and maybe there's time for you to grab someone to ask your question after. So we are going to do a rapid fire 1-minute closing. Anything you'd like to respond to from your fellow panelists, anything you want our audience to take away both online and in person. We'll start with you, Minister Ono, 1-minute wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just what I'd like to also emphasize at the last for the concluding remarks is that responding to disaster reduction is not for disaster time only, but we need to prepare from normal times because usually the gender stereotypes from normal times are often amplified difficulties and challenges during the disaster time, so that we need to prepare in the normal time. That what we have learned from our disaster experiences in Japan. Thank you very much.
Okay. First of all, you're such a good moderator, so I just have to say that. Just quickly from us, again, I'm going to actually steal your line. Yes, preparation, I think, is the key, like making sure that we are looking at the assessments of where climate change is really happening, what the areas are at risk. I'm going to use the UN as an example, since every year at UNGA, everybody gets very surprised that UNGA happens in September and nobody prepares for it. And we also know the same thing about climate issues and climate crises, and we know where the most vulnerable areas are, and let's make sure to have that preparation ahead of time. I'm going to use Moldova as an example. Moldova, interestingly enough, before the crisis in the war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, they had already had border patrol agents that were women. They had increased the number of border patrol agents to 50%. And so when all these women and children came over, they had women to go to that they trusted, and that trust and that ability to take things in, they had prepared for. They had already done the analysis of what would need to happen. And so I think it's just a best practice. Again, prepare.
No, thank you. I think I took too much time before, so I'll just do a TikTok round wrap up. No, I think what we've learned is just asking why some of these blockages to inclusion happen, because we get different answers based on where we engage. In Yemen, for example, our project manager asked why, and he got a totally different answer than he thought it would be. It was just mainly over practicalities that women always worked during the day, like in terms of childcare. So I was just asking why these blockages are hindering disaster risk relief of women.
I actually have similar things to say about the idea of preparing. And I would say that involving women's civil society groups in disaster DRR work requires that you talk to them before the disaster and make plans. Ideally, definitely at the national level, but ideally at the local level. Have plans at the local level and have these women's groups involved and helping to plan and creating checklists or whatever the practical tools are so that their voices and their wisdom and expertise is available, and there's no excuse about expediency that women can't be included at the time of disaster. So thank you.
I just want to emphasize the need and for partnerships, for collaboration, and also particularly for the women's movements in all of these thematic areas, breaking those silos, but also understanding very well what the ecosystem is in all of those thematic areas so we could actually move those separate agendas forward while collectively moving gender equality forward. Thank you.
Great. So we have plan, ask why, prepare, prepare, prepare. I would build on, it sounds like you're saying develop relationships early on too, and then I'll just add prepare again. So I want to thank all of you, our panelists, virtual, from the floor, all of you for being here on a really busy week and day. We hope you can take some of this hope and this energy and this interest on throughout your day and time. And please stay engaged with IPI. Thank you again, Sasakawa USA. We're really excited to have you as a partner. Thank you.